group of teenagers accidentally stumbled upon an old refrigerator thrown out among tires and trash. The door, carefully wrapped in industrial tape, caught their attention. The kids decided someone might have hidden something valuable inside and ripped off a few strips. But as soon as the door creaked open, the teenagers jumped back from a sharp, unpleasant smell. They immediately called the police. Patrolman Mike Torres arrived at the scene. He carefully cut the remaining tape and fully opened the refrigerator. Inside were severely decomposed remains, making immediate identification impossible. No documents or belongings indicating the identity of the deceased were found. But the police immediately recalled a high-profile case that had gripped the city for almost a month. 5 weeks earlier, 5-year-old Cody Brown had vanished without a trace. His photos were posted everywhere, and the police were investigating every lead and every clue. Now the investigation had to conduct an official forensic examination to confirm the most likely assumption, that the body found in the refrigerator could be Cody. This meant the police were now dealing not just with a disappearance, but with a murder. July 10, 1999, Maple Drive, a suburb of Palmer. A warm Saturday, someone is mowing their lawn. Someone is having a barbecue. Everything looks calm and safe, like any other summer weekend. The Brown family lives in a small house in the middle of the street. The house is a single-story, neat home with a well-kept lawn and a driveway leading to the garage. John Brown, the head of the family, had left for work in the morning. He was a manager at a hardware store. His wife, Laura, is spending the day at home looking after their 5-year-old son, Cody. Maple Drive is a quiet suburban neighborhood where many neighbors know each other well and maintain good relationships. The exception is the neighbor to the right, Arthur Vance. He is 52 and lives alone. Arthur works as a night watchman, returns home in the early morning, and sleeps all day. He is irritable, constantly complains about noise, and is often rude to his neighbors, so they try to avoid him. People had simply learned to keep their distance from Arthur to avoid unnecessary conflicts. That morning, Laura was cleaning the kitchen. She periodically looked out the window to check on Cody playing in the yard. Her son was kicking a ball on the grass and seemed perfectly fine. There was nothing unusual about his behavior. Around noon, Laura finished cleaning, decided to take a short break, and have some tea. She checked the yard again. Cody was there, still playing. As she went to get a cup, she heard the home phone ring. Laura went into the living room to answer. It was her friend Jennifer. They talked for just a couple of minutes about everyday things and weekend plans. After ending the call, Laura returned to the kitchen and looked out the window. The yard was now empty. Her son was nowhere to be seen. At first, she wasn't worried, thinking Cody had run into the house. But when she called his name and got no answer, she felt a slight unease. She quickly checked the bedroom, bathroom, and living room. Her son was nowhere to be found. Then Laura went outside and called for Cody again. Only silence answered. Her gaze fell on the fence separating her property from Arthur's. The neighbor's garage was closed and the yard looked empty, quiet, and completely normal. A few seconds later, the neighbor's door swung open and Arthur came out onto the porch. He looked irritated, as if he had just been woken up. Laura asked if he had seen her son. Arthur grumpily replied that he hadn't seen anyone, complained that she was disturbing his sleep, then turned and slammed the door shut. After talking to the neighbor, Laura started to get more nervous. She looked around the yard again and realized that not only Cody was gone, but also the ball he had been playing with. She carefully checked the fence but found nothing strange or suspicious. Her heart began to beat faster when she looked at the clock. It had been about 10 minutes since she last saw her son. Laura decided not to waste any more time and hurried to check the neighboring yards, hoping Cody had just wandered off playing nearby and would soon be found. 3:15 p.m. Laura stands on her porch, looking at the empty yard. Neither the ball nor Cody is anywhere in sight. At first, she thinks it's just a joke, but the yard is empty and no one answers her calls. She quickly starts checking the yard again, looking in the bushes, on the swing set, even under the porch. No one is there. Then Laura runs to the neighbors on the left. The house has been vacant for 2 months. Across the street, her neighbor Ellen is watering flowers, but she says she hasn't seen anything unusual. Laura crosses the street to the Murphys' house. Jim and his wife Carla can't help either. Both were busy with chores and hadn't been looking outside. Other neighbors also hadn't noticed anything strange. Half an hour has passed with no results. Laura calls her husband, John, who drops everything at work and rushes home. At 3:45 p.m., Laura calls 911 and tells the operator that Cody has disappeared right from their own yard. She describes what her son was wearing and what he looks like. The operator tries to calm her, but Laura's voice betrays her anxiety. 10 minutes later, a police patrol car appears at the house. The officers quickly survey the area and question the neighbors again, but the answers don't change. No one saw or heard anything. The police check the fences, the enclosure, and the bushes around the house. They find no clues as to where Cody might have gone. The police also approach Arthur's house. The neighbor is annoyed and clearly unhappy with the repeated questions, again stating that he saw nothing and was just trying to sleep after his shift. The officers find no reason to linger and leave. By evening, the search expands. Additional patrols and volunteers arrive. A large-scale operation begins. They check the park, the woods, neighboring streets, and vacant lots. The parents, along with other people, search the neighborhood calling their son's name, but no one answers. As darkness falls, K9 units with dogs arrive, but even they can't pick up a clear scent and quickly lose the trail. By midnight, the search still yields no results. The Brown family's home is full of people, yet it feels empty and lifeless. In Cody's room, the toys are in their places, but the room's owner is not there. At 1 a.m., the police officially declare Cody Brown missing. Now, it's not just a search for a missing person, it's an official investigation. The police prepare to investigate all possible scenarios: an accident, a runaway, or a kidnapping. Detailed interviews with all residents of the area are scheduled for the next day. For the first time, the Brown family confronts the realization that their quiet, peaceful life will never be the same again. On July 11th, 1999, the day after Cody Brown's disappearance, the police began a systematic canvass of Maple Drive. Officers methodically wrote down every word from the neighbors, recording any detail, even those that seemed insignificant. It seemed like a mere formality, as everyone had already been questioned the day before and no leads had emerged. Officer Steve Hudson calmly went from one house to another. At each house, the answers were the same. We were busy with our own things. We didn't notice anything unusual. By midday, he had visited 14 houses with no results. The last address on his list was the home of Arthur Vance, the Brown family's neighbor to the right. Hudson approached the house and knocked on the door several times. A minute later, the door swung open, revealing a clearly sleep-deprived and irritated Arthur. The patrolman introduced himself, explained the reason for his visit, and asked the standard question about the previous day. Vance showed no enthusiasm, responding dryly and briefly. He had seen nothing unusual and went straight to bed after his night shift. Hudson asked for permission to inspect the backyard and garage. Vance reluctantly agreed and stepped aside. The patrolman carefully looked around the yard. Everything was clean, neat, and there was nothing suspicious. He then walked to the garage and, upon slightly opening the door, immediately smelled a strong odor of bleach. The smell was so strong that Hudson took a step back to acclimate. He calmly asked Arthur what had happened. Without hesitation, Vance explained that he had recently spilled motor oil and decided to clean the stain with bleach, as it was the first thing that came to hand. The explanation sounded convincing and logical. Hudson saw no reason for suspicion. He noted the moment in his notepad, making a brief entry. Subject Vance saw nothing. Strong smell of bleach in the garage. Explained. Cleaning spilled oil. The note was made automatically, just in case. Meanwhile, other officers were finishing their interviews with the neighbors. The answers were nearly identical. No one had noticed anything unusual, heard any noise, screams, or anything suspicious. It seemed as if the entire neighborhood was repeating the same thing. By the evening of the second day, the police still had no real leads. The search in the area yielded nothing. Volunteers began to disperse, and the Brown family's hope for a quick resolution dwindled. The atmosphere in the house was heavy. It felt like everyone was waiting for a miracle that never came. The police gradually moved to the next stage, compiling a list of people who needed to be investigated further. This list included all neighbors who could not confirm their whereabouts at the time of Cody's disappearance. Among them was Arthur Vance, for now only formally, along with the others. At this point, none of the officers gave much thought to Hudson's note about the smell of bleach in Arthur's garage. The details simply lay in a stack of papers, like one of hundreds of similar notes. But soon, it would be this very chance entry that would make the police look at Cody Brown's disappearance in a completely different light. The first days of the investigation were a tense routine. The area was thoroughly searched by volunteers and police. Wooded areas, basements, garages, and even drainage pipes. But by July 13th, the searches had not yielded a single real lead. Investigators were forced to reclassify the case from a missing person to a possible crime. According to FBI protocol, the investigation always begins with the closest circle. On the morning of July 14th, John and Laura Brown were called to the station. They were questioned separately, meticulously reconstructing the events of the day Cody disappeared. John clearly explained that he had spent the entire day at work at the hardware store, leaving only after his wife's call. Investigators double-checked his alibi with store employees and management. His colleagues confirmed John's account, specifying that he had indeed not left. The store's video surveillance system was basic, with recordings made irregularly and often erased. But the police managed to obtain some frames confirming John's presence at his workplace during the specified time. The conversation with Laura was more difficult, as she had to relive the painful memories of that day. Investigators carefully checked her call to her friend, noting the time and duration of the conversation. A request for phone records and a talk with the friend herself confirmed that Laura had described the events accurately. No contradictions or omissions were found. The next day, the police conducted a full search of the Brown family home. The living quarters, garage, attic, and surrounding property were inspected and documented. For the parents, this procedure was a serious ordeal, despite the professionalism of the police officers. In the end, the search yielded no results. No suspicious circumstances or evidence were found. To definitively clear the parents of suspicion, John and Laura were offered a polygraph test. Both immediately agreed, despite the obvious difficulty of the procedure. John took the test first, after which specialists noted that there were no signs of deception in his answers. Laura's test took a little longer due to severe emotional distress, but the results were the same. Her statements were completely truthful. After all these procedures, the parents were no longer considered suspects in the case. Now, investigators had to re-examine the initial materials. Repeated checks of the area again brought no results. The investigation had hit a dead end. Volunteers gradually stopped searching, and it seemed the case would remain unsolved. This continued until August 10th, 1999, when teenagers discovered an old refrigerator at an illegal dump site near Big Creek. Inside were the remains of an unknown person, and the case was reclassified as a major crime. At that moment, the identity of the deceased had not yet been officially established. So the police began to carefully review old reports, trying to find a possible link between the discovery and any previously registered disappearance. In the first 24 hours after the refrigerator was found, detectives once again pulled up the files from July. Among the standard reports stating that neighbors had noticed nothing suspicious, the attention of the investigation was drawn to a brief entry by Patrolman Steve Hudson from July 11th. Neighbor to the right, Arthur Vance, stated he was sleeping after a night shift. Strong smell of bleach in the garage. Explained he was cleaning spilled oil. During the initial check, this detail was considered insignificant and quickly set aside. However, now, after the discovery of the remains, Arthur Vance's choice seemed strange. Bleach is rarely used to remove oil stains. It is far more often used in completely different situations. Re-examining the photos of Arthur's property taken in July, investigators noticed the concrete floor of the garage, which looked recently washed and damp. This detail, previously overlooked during the initial inspection, could now be of serious importance. The police had developed reasonable suspicion that Vance might have been trying to hide something more serious than spilled oil. But until the identity of the deceased was officially established, the investigation could not move forward. Despite this, the police decided to re-examine Arthur's work schedule, his words, and his actions on that day more thoroughly. Now, Arthur Vance's name stood out on the general list, and the note about the bleach became a potential clue that could lead the investigation to a new theory. After the refrigerator was found at the dump near Big Creek, the police's attention turned entirely to the forensic examination. Investigators understood that the future course of the investigation depended on its results. While the laboratory worked, detectives decided to re-examine the materials from July. They once again reviewed the old reports, double-checked the statements of neighbors and witnesses, but almost all the information was familiar and offered nothing new. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was gradually returning to daily life. Volunteers no longer came to the station, search activities had completely ceased, and media interest had all but faded. Cody's family continued to await the findings, hoping for a mistake or a coincidence, but the chances of a positive outcome were diminishing. With each passing day, the uncertainty increased the pressure on everyone involved in the investigation. The police stopped making comments, limiting themselves to the standard phrase about ongoing laboratory procedures. The officers were waiting for official confirmation, after which they could clearly determine their next steps. Finally, on August 9th, nearly a month after Cody's disappearance, investigators received the preliminary findings from the experts. The laboratory officially confirmed that the remains found belonged to Cody Brown. This conclusion instantly shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a major crime. The smell of bleach, which no one had paid attention to before, suddenly became the primary piece of evidence. Arthur Vance's statements, which had seemed like a standard formality a month ago, now appeared in a new light. The police closed the search case and officially opened a criminal investigation, with Arthur Vance as the central figure. The very next morning, investigators began preparing for a re-examination of Vance's house and garage. All previous materials, photo reports and patrol officers' notes were retrieved from the archives and studied anew. The investigation was now focused not on the question, "Where is Cody?" but on a completely different one. Who did this, and why? Arthur Vance was no longer just a neighbor. He had now become the main person of interest in the investigation. After the forensic examination confirmed the identity of the remains, the case officially stopped being a search. Now the police were investigating a murder. It seemed that the detectives knew which direction to go, but it soon became clear that their confidence was premature. The main obstacle was the refrigerator itself, discovered at the dump near Big Creek. It gave the investigation no leads. Someone had done a thorough job. All serial numbers, stickers, and markings that could have helped establish its origin had been removed from the casing. The person who left it there clearly wanted the discovery to remain anonymous. The dump also proved useless to the investigation. It was an uncontrolled, unofficial area. The police questioned residents of nearby areas and checked the roads leading to the dump, but found no eyewitnesses or useful testimony. There were simply no surveillance cameras in such places at the time, which meant it was impossible to obtain visual evidence. The investigation was quickly losing momentum, so the lead detective, Robert Doyle, decided to return to the starting point, the old reports collected in the first days of the search. In such situations, experience told him that answers often lie in small details that are overlooked at the beginning. He requested all the documents compiled by patrol officers on July 11th, the day Cody disappeared. For the first few hours, Doyle carefully read the dry, typical phrases. Neighbors saw nothing, heard nothing, noticed nothing suspicious. At first, it seemed like a pointless routine, until the detective noticed something unusual. In Patrolman Steve Hudson's report, it was mentioned that the neighbor to the right, Arthur Vance, was sleeping after his night shift on the day of Cody's disappearance and saw nothing. It was a standard explanation that Doyle had encountered in many other documents, but his attention was caught by a small note at the end. The patrolman had noted a strong smell of bleach in Vance's garage, and Vance had explained that he was trying to remove spilled oil. Doyle didn't jump to conclusions, but jotted down this unusual fact in his notebook. Bleach is not the most suitable agent for cleaning up oil. Solvents or sawdust are typically used in such cases, as any car enthusiast would know. The patrolman had clearly noted it as something atypical, but at the time, no one had attached any significance to this detail. The detective decided to check the photos of Vance's property taken on the day the boy disappeared. One of the pictures showed the garage, and its concrete floor looked suspiciously clean. Unnaturally clean, as if it had recently been thoroughly washed. It wasn't direct proof, but it suggested strange behavior from the man living next door. Nevertheless, Doyle did not rush. He knew that even the most suspicious oddity could be a coincidence. However, it was impossible to ignore. Therefore, he filed an official request for a re-examination of Vance's house and garage. It was important to conduct it in a way that the neighbor himself wouldn't feel like a suspect. Just a routine check to clarify some details. Arthur Vance remained just one of many people involved in the case for now. But now, his name was highlighted, and a note was added to the investigation files about the need to thoroughly examine all circumstances surrounding this man. The refrigerator, which had long remained completely anonymous, finally had a faint but tangible connection to a specific person. For Detective Doyle, this was not proof of guilt. However, it is often such small details and oddities that lead to solving crimes. Now, the task of the investigation was to carefully and methodically verify whether this connection was a coincidence or if something much more significant was hidden behind it. Detective Robert Doyle understood that the oddity found in the patrolman's report was not enough to seriously accuse the Browns' neighbor, but a sense of professional unease lingered. He knew that everyday details could sometimes be decisive in an investigation if interpreted correctly. The next morning, Doyle decided to finally clarify the matter of the garage cleanup. He dialed the number of the forensic laboratory and spoke with Thomas Murray, an experienced forensic expert who had already assisted the police in complex cases. The conversation was calm and businesslike. At first, they discussed the current investigation. Then the detective moved to the key point. He asked a simple and, at first glance, trivial question. What is typically used to remove automotive oil spilled on a concrete floor? Murray responded without a pause. According to him, oil is usually removed with special solvents, ordinary household soap, or absorbed with sawdust or sorbents. These are items that almost every car owner or garage owner has. Doyle didn't specify why he was interested in this particular detail and immediately moved to the second question, which concerned him much more. What if someone used bleach to clean the concrete? The expert on the other end of the line paused for a moment as if clarifying something for himself before confidently stating that chlorine-based solutions are practically useless against oil stains. According to the expert, such agents are used exclusively in cases where it is necessary to remove traces of organic origin. For example, when one wants to get rid of bloodstains. The detective thanked the expert and ended the call. Now, sitting at his desk and rereading the lines in the report, he clearly saw that Arthur Vance had given a false explanation to the patrolman. At that time, in the first days of the search, it seemed like a minor detail that no one paid attention to. Back then, Vance was just a neighbor who gave a standard explanation. He was sleeping after a night shift and decided to clean up his garage. No one noticed that this explanation made no sense. Now, Doyle was reviewing it again and understood that a person who tells the police something untrue is usually trying to hide something. But the detective knew very well that a lie alone was not enough to make serious accusations. The lie could have a simpler explanation. Vance could have lied out of nervousness, fear, or for some personal reason completely unrelated to Cody's disappearance. Nevertheless, for the first time in a long time, the investigation had an opportunity to move the case forward. If a person lied once, it meant he could have lied about something else. This meant that his entire account of that day needed to be re-examined much more carefully. Witnesses needed to be re-interviewed, and every detail had to be clarified. The detective ordered a re-examination of Vance's property and garage using special reagents that detect traces of organic compounds. It was important to understand whether this smell of bleach had anything to do with what happened to Cody or if it was just an unfortunate coincidence. For now, this was the only direction that could yield results. It became clear to Doyle that the oddity recorded a month ago, which seemed insignificant at the time, could actually be the first serious mistake made by the person involved in Cody's disappearance. But why Vance decided to lie to the police, the detective could not yet understand. For a person not involved in the incident, there is no reason to invent details where one can simply tell the truth. Now, an important prospect opened up for the investigation. Either Arthur Vance was a random figure who got tangled up in his own statements, or he had a very direct connection to what happened on the day of Cody Brown's disappearance. And this became the main task of the investigation: to find out who the neighbor who so unsuccessfully tried to hide the truth about his garage really was. After the call to the laboratory, Detective Robert Doyle clearly realized that the situation had changed. He had not just received new information, but a convincing lead that could break the deadlock in the investigation. But Doyle still had an important question. If the person had diligently cleaned the garage, did the police have a real chance of finding anything? He understood that visually, the room looked perfectly clean. And yet, the detective decided to trust the experts. He turned to James Hartman, an experienced criminalist who had often found evidence where conventional methods failed. Hartman advised using luminol. This substance reacts with minute traces of hemoglobin that are invisible to the naked eye. In complete darkness, the reagent illuminates even meticulously cleaned areas if there were once bloodstains. But in this case, there was another circumstance that the suspect himself was unaware of. According to Hartman, using bleach only seems like a good solution at first glance. It can indeed bleach blood, making it visually unnoticeable, but bleach cannot remove the iron present in the blood. Moreover, the chemical reaction of luminol with chlorine-containing agents greatly enhances the glow, making the treated areas even more visible. Thus, the person who used a chlorine-based agent to conceal traces had not only failed to get rid of them, but had, on the contrary, highlighted them for the criminalists. That very evening, the investigative team arrived at Arthur Vance's house. Before applying the reagent, the garage floor was carefully cleaned of dust. The lights were completely turned off, and then they began to carefully spray the luminol solution. Almost immediately, the concrete floor of the garage began to glow brightly, revealing a huge area that was impossible to miss. The size and brightness of the stain indicated that someone had recently tried to hide something here. For the first time, the investigation had objective. scientifically confirmed evidence that Arthur's version of a simple oil stain was a deliberate lie. Now, Detective Doyle knew on what he could build the further investigation. Vance had not just given incorrect information to the police, but had made efforts to hide what really happened in his garage. Doyle understood that now the question was only when and how they would get a confession. Arthur Vance had transformed from a merely suspicious neighbor into the key figure in the case. It was his thoughtless actions, committed in a state of fear, that provided the police with the opportunity to obtain a decisive clue. For the first time, the investigators saw that behind the neighbor's strange behavior was not simple confusion, but a specific intent. Now, all efforts were directed at finding out why Vance lied and what exactly he was trying to hide by so hastily getting rid of the traces in his garage. After the luminol test showed obvious traces in Arthur Vance's garage, Detective Doyle had something concrete for the first time. But even after this, he understood that these results would not be enough to convince a court. For an official indictment, the investigation needed irrefutable evidence, collected and documented during an officially authorized search, not a preliminary test. The previous luminol check was just a preliminary step, a quick reaction to a suspicious detail. Now, a full-scale official inspection with a court warrant, criminalists, and the most detailed documentation of every sample and trace was required. Having obtained the court's permission, Doyle understood that a decisive stage of the investigation was ahead. But while preparations for the official inspection were underway, the police placed Vance under covert surveillance. The detectives needed to know if his behavior would change after the police showed open interest in his garage. Arthur Vance, however, showed no signs of concern or anxiety. His behavior remained the same as before. Night work, returning home, ordinary trips to the store. He did not talk to anyone more than usual, did not try to hide or destroy any possible evidence. His calmness, at first glance, suggested that the police might be mistaken. This unsettled some of the detectives, and doubts began to arise among them as to whether the investigation was on the right track. Doyle did not listen to his colleagues' doubts. For him, Vance's calmness was not proof of his innocence, but on the contrary, proof of his calculation and cold-bloodedness. He reviewed Vance's personal file again, recalling the neighbors' stories. Everyone confirmed that Vance was an abrupt, short-tempered man who often clashed with neighbors over the slightest issues. Recalling the initial testimonies of the neighbors, Doyle was convinced. A man with such a character was capable of erupting suddenly and uncontrollably and then trying to hide the consequences. Nevertheless, for the court, emotions and suspicions were insufficient. Legally sound evidence was needed. The detective had only one correct move left: an official search of the garage with a court warrant and the involvement of criminalists. The team carefully prepared for the inspection. It was decided that the garage would be examined in maximum detail, with every inch carefully photographed and documented. The police wanted to ensure that nothing would be missed or simplified during the official inspection. The inspection was scheduled for early morning, so that Arthur Vance would be at home after his night shift. The police could not afford to make a mistake, and Doyle knew that this day would be decisive for the entire case. Either they would obtain solid evidence, or they would be forced to admit that they had been following a false lead for a long time. The evening before the inspection, Doyle reviewed all the case materials one more time. He was confident in the correctness of his choice, but he also understood something else. Without real evidence, any version, no matter how correct, would remain just a hypothesis. Now everything depended on what the criminalists would find in Arthur Vance's garage tomorrow. After the preliminary inspection of Arthur Vance's garage using luminol, Detective Doyle had his first serious lead. Nevertheless, until the criminalists conducted a full laboratory analysis, the traces could have belonged to anyone. It was premature to draw conclusions without additional confirmation. It was important to understand not only how the suspect might have tried to hide the traces, but also why he decided to do so. While the specialists prepared for the official inspection and a more in-depth examination of the collected samples, Doyle and his colleagues decided to re-interview the neighbors, this time delving into the specifics of Vance's character and habits. The interviews revealed that Arthur Vance was not just a strange neighbor. Many residents of the street admitted that they preferred not to deal with him to avoid unpleasant situations. According to them, Vance often clashed with people over trivial matters: loud conversations on the street, a wrongly parked car, trash near his fence. But his worst reactions were to any form of children's play. A family living nearby recounted how Arthur once came out into his yard and started yelling at a group of local teenagers simply because they were riding their bicycles too loudly near his house. Other neighbors recalled how Vance had repeatedly taken and thrown away balls that landed on his property, doing so silently and demonstratively to show his displeasure. Over time, people simply started warning their children not to play near his house. Everyone knew that Vance worked as a night watchman and slept during the day. Any noise during his rest period would extremely irritate him and trigger outbursts of anger. However, no one could recall his aggression ever escalating beyond shouting and reprimands. That is why, during their initial encounter with the police, the neighbors never even considered that Vance could be involved in Cody's disappearance. Everyone considered him a confrontational but not dangerous person. But Detective Doyle saw the situation differently. He knew that suppressed irritability, compounded by constant lack of sleep and domestic conflicts, could at any moment escalate into an uncontrollable burst of anger. It was a completely understandable, though not justifiable, motive for a person with such a character. Furthermore, Doyle learned that a few days before Cody's disappearance, Vance had a serious argument with the parents of other neighborhood children because the kids had accidentally damaged his fence. That time, the conflict ended with another quarrel, but no one could have guessed what consequences years of accumulated anger might lead to. Now, the picture of that day became clear and convincing for the investigation. It was not a premeditated act, but a domestic outburst of rage that the suspect could not control. But even such clarity of motive required legally confirmed evidence. Everything depended on the results of the official inspection and forensic analysis, which were to definitively confirm or refute the investigation's theory. On August 13, 1999, around 7 in the evening, Detective Robert Doyle and a team of criminalists arrived at Arthur Vance's house. They held a court order authorizing a full inspection of the garage and the collection of official evidence. At this stage, the investigation did not intend to press charges immediately. First, they needed to precisely establish the origin of the previously found traces. When Arthur Vance came out to meet the police, he appeared completely calm. The detective informed him of the warrant to inspect the garage, to which Vance replied briefly and indifferently, "Go ahead and look. There's nothing there anyway." His tone and demeanor suggested that he had no doubt about the outcome of the search. For several minutes, Vance calmly watched the criminalists work from a distance. He did not interfere or show much interest in what was happening. When the detective asked him to report any potential findings in the garage in advance, he just shrugged indifferently, explaining that there was only old junk and tools that hadn't been used in a long time. While Vance observed from outside, the criminalists began the crucial part of the inspection, applying the luminol solution to the floor near the workbench. Despite the preliminary test results, the police needed to officially and thoroughly document every detail so that it could later be used in court. When everything was ready, the lights in the garage were turned off. For a brief moment, there was complete silence and darkness. A few seconds later, a bright blue stain began to appear on the concrete surface. Its size was significant, about 2 by 2 feet, and it looked as if this area had been intentionally and extensively scrubbed. Upon seeing the luminol reaction, Vance showed clear signs of anxiety for the first time. He hurried to explain that there might be stains from old paint or household chemicals that he had allegedly spilled several months ago. His voice sounded confident, but the detectives noticed the change in his intonation and the tension on his face. However, the suspect's words meant little now. The experts carefully documented the test results, photographed the stain, and took samples from the floor for subsequent laboratory analysis. The official search procedure was fully observed. Detective Doyle felt that the investigation was on the right track. Of course, until the criminalists conducted the final analysis, nothing could be said for certain. But Vance's behavior and his clear attempt to hide what had happened in the garage now looked more than suspicious. The team finished their work without pressing any charges yet. For now, it was important to gather all the facts and evidence so that the prosecution would have the most complete and confirmed picture. The forensic analysis was supposed to establish the exact nature of the found traces, after which the investigation could officially move from suspicion to concrete actions. When the concrete floor of the garage lit up with a distinct blue stain, Arthur Vance changed dramatically. His previous confidence and composure instantly vanished. He began to look around anxiously, trying to figure out how to react. At that moment, it became clear that any explanation he offered would no longer be taken seriously. Detective Robert Doyle calmly observed the suspect's reaction. What was happening now was not just a recheck of the garage, but a legally documented procedure meant to definitively confirm the results of the preliminary analysis. The first examination of the samples had already shown a high probability of a match between the discovered biological traces and the materials found near Cody's remains at the Big Creek dump. However, for an official indictment, the police needed to conduct a second examination and obtain a final laboratory conclusion. Arthur tried to talk again about household stains and accidental chemical spills, but his words now sounded flustered and incoherent. He himself understood that such explanations were useless and looked like a desperate attempt to evade the obvious. The criminalists meticulously documented every stage of the procedure. They recollected the necessary materials for forensic analysis and carefully recorded what they saw. Vance stood aside, not trying to interfere. He had already realized that his every action was futile. After the investigators finished documenting all their actions and collecting the necessary samples, the police made the final decision to detain the suspect. One of the officers officially informed Vance that he was being detained on suspicion of involvement in the death of Cody Brown. Arthur, calmly and without resistance, allowed himself to be handcuffed, without saying a word. Neighbors watched from a distance with anxiety and disbelief. Many remembered how Vance often showed aggression and displeasure over the smallest things. But none of them could have imagined that an ordinary domestic conflict could lead to such tragic events. After the arrest, the police completed their work at the scene. The collected samples were sent to the laboratory for final analysis, which was to confirm the preliminary findings and put a final point on the investigation. For Detective Doyle, this day was a decisive stage in an investigation that had begun with a routine call from teenagers who found a strange refrigerator at the Big Creek dump. Now, the picture of the incident was clear. What started as an unexplained disappearance turned out to be the result of a domestic outburst of anger and the subsequent attempts to cover it up. Now, all that remained for the police was to obtain the official laboratory results and prepare the materials to hand the case over to the court. Doubts about the suspect's guilt had vanished, and the investigation was confidently moving towards its final and logical conclusion. After his arrest on the evening of August 13th, Arthur Vance was taken to the police station, but events did not unfold as quickly as one might think. Although the investigators were certain of his involvement in Cody's disappearance, they needed time to obtain the final laboratory results to back up their suspicions with irrefutable evidence. For the first few days, Arthur barely communicated with the investigators, trying to avoid long conversations and giving the briefest possible answers. Detective Robert Doyle did not rush the situation, understanding that pressure would not help at this point. Only the official lab findings could change the suspect's position. While waiting for the results, criminalists and detectives conducted additional investigative actions. They re-interviewed Vance's neighbors, gathering information about past conflicts. Several residents of the area recalled that Arthur regularly complained about noise and could react aggressively to even minor domestic inconveniences. Information from his workplace also indicated his difficult character and constant conflicts with colleagues. On August 18th, the investigation received the official laboratory report. It unequivocally stated that the biological traces from Vance's garage were a complete match with the samples found with Cody's remains at the Big Creek dump. Now, the investigation's theory had irrefutable scientific confirmation. Only after this, on August 22nd, was Arthur called back into the interrogation room. This time, the investigators had complete confidence and concrete evidence. Vance sat in silence, avoiding looking at the photos laid out on the table before him. A picture of a smiling Cody, a photo of the refrigerator from the dump, and the result of the luminol test in his garage. He understood that making excuses was pointless. After nearly 40 minutes of tense silence, Arthur began to speak. His voice was quiet, monotonous, and lifeless. According to the official protocol, Vance explained that he had not planned what happened. He said he was very tired after his night shift, and the constant noise from the neighboring yard was driving him crazy. When Cody once again approached his house, Arthur lost his temper and went outside, intending only to stop what was happening. However, the situation got out of his control. He pushed Cody hard and could no longer fix the consequences. Arthur detailed how panic overwhelmed him, and he didn't know what to do. In a state of horror and confusion, he decided to hide what had happened at all costs. He used an old refrigerator stored in his garage and then tried to wash the floor with bleach. At night, he took the refrigerator to the abandoned dump, hoping no one would ever find it. From that moment on, Arthur lived in constant tension, waiting for the police to show up at his door. The suspect's testimony fully matched the existing evidence and the results of the laboratory tests, which allowed for the final formation of a complete picture of the incident. Now, all that remained for the investigation was to formalize the collected materials and prepare to hand the case over to the court. The case, which began with a mysterious disappearance and a lengthy search, now had convincing answers to all questions. Based on Arthur's detailed confession and the official investigation materials, the police conducted a thorough reconstruction of the events that took place on July 10, 1999. Around 3 in the afternoon, Cody was playing in his backyard. His parents were inside and were not monitoring what was happening outside. During the game, his ball accidentally flew over the fence and landed on the property of Arthur Vance, who was sleeping after a night shift and was painfully sensitive to any noise. At approximately 3:05 p.m., Cody slipped through a hole in the old fence into the neighboring yard. He wanted to retrieve his ball, which was lying near the unlocked garage. Arthur, awakened by the unfamiliar noise, shot out of bed and went outside, no longer restraining his irritation. Seeing Cody near the garage, he lost control of his temper and strode sharply toward him. According to Arthur's testimony, he did not intend to harm anyone. His only goal was to get rid of the noise and make Cody leave. But in a state of extreme irritation, he lost control and, as he approached the garage, suddenly and forcefully pushed the boy. Cody, unable to keep his footing, fell backward, hitting his head on the concrete corner of the workbench. From that moment on, the events became irreversible. Arthur instantly realized the seriousness of the situation and was completely paralyzed by fear and confusion. For the next 20 minutes, he tried to pull himself together and find some way out of the situation. The only decision he could make was to get rid of the evidence at all costs. At 3:30 p.m., Vance moved Cody into an old refrigerator that was in the garage. He then noticed small traces of blood on the concrete floor. His fear intensified to the point where he could no longer think clearly. Giving in to this state, Arthur grabbed a bottle of industrial bleach and began to thoroughly clean the stain on the floor. At that moment, he had no idea that this very action would become the main mistake of his entire plan. Vance spent the rest of the day in a state of tension, pretending that nothing had happened, trying not to draw the attention of his neighbors. Every minute dragged on agonizingly, making him nervously wait for nightfall. Around 3 in the morning, on July 11th, Arthur loaded the refrigerator into his pickup truck and drove it to the abandoned dump near Big Creek. He was confident that no one would ever find it there. Acting quickly and as quietly as possible, he returned home, convinced that he had successfully rid himself of the main problem. However, it was his attempt to mask the traces of the crime with bleach that turned into the decisive evidence against him. Arthur did not suspect that bleach, instead of hiding the blood, leaves a specific reaction with a substance called luminol. This allowed investigators to quickly and accurately identify the crime scene. The reconstruction of events perfectly matched Arthur's confession and confirmed the collected evidence. The police now had the final answers, explaining everything that happened on July 10th. An ordinary domestic conflict had escalated into a tragedy, the consequences of which changed the lives of many people. The last stage remaining for the investigation was to prepare for the court trial, where Vance would have to officially answer for his actions. In June 2000, the Ohio State Court began hearing the case of Arthur Vance. By this time, the prosecution had compelling evidence, and local residents were waiting to see what the punishment would be for what had happened almost a year earlier. The prosecutor carefully presented all the main pieces of evidence against the defendant: Vance's detailed confession, the criminalist's report, and the results of laboratory tests confirming the link between the defendant's garage and the discovery at the Big Creek dump. The prosecution emphasized that Vance had deliberately and methodically tried to conceal his actions, which had seriously hindered the investigators' work. The defense, in turn, argued that Vance's actions were not premeditated and were the result of a strong emotional state and physical exhaustion after a night shift. According to their version, the attempts to hide what had happened were chaotic and thoughtless, caused solely by panic and fear. For several days, the court carefully examined the arguments of both sides, as well as the testimony of witnesses and experts. Cody's parents were present in the courtroom and followed the proceedings without engaging in public discussions or speaking to the press. The court considered the facts without emotion, adhering to strict legal procedures. After the closing arguments, the court recessed for a short deliberation and soon returned to announce the final verdict. Arthur Vance was found guilty of second-degree murder and intentional tampering with evidence. The court stressed that the defendant had acted deliberately and created obstacles for the investigation, which significantly complicated the establishment of the truth. The court sentenced Arthur Vance to 25 years in an Ohio state prison. After the sentence was announced, the trial came to an end. The story that began with an unexplained disappearance and shook the suburb of Palmer had reached its official legal conclusion. Nevertheless, for the city's residents, it became a constant reminder of the consequences that can arise from a domestic dispute if emotions are not kept in check. After the trial, life on Maple Drive never returned to its former rhythm. The Brown family moved in 2001, selling the house and trying to leave the past behind. The house was soon bought by a new family, but neighbors say that for a while, the property was vacant. People were hesitant to move into a place where an investigation had recently taken place. The dump near Big Creek was cleaned up and officially closed in 2002. Today, a small city park stands in its place with a few benches and a sign reminding people of the prohibition against illegal dumping. Arthur Vance is serving his sentence at the Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio. According to the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, he is being held without any disciplinary violations. His next parole hearing is scheduled for June 2025. The story of Maple Drive and Arthur Vance remained in the memory of the residents of Cuyahoga County for a long time. For many, this case became a reminder of how an ordinary burst of irritation can forever change the lives of several people.